I'm Jeff of Bebop's Turnings. Today we're going to talk about using a wedgie sled. Now, there's a couple of different types of wedgie sleds that are out there. You can make your own, which is what I've done here. The wedgie sled is basically a sled for the table saw that has two different rails on it, a top rail and a lower rail. It also has the ability to set angles so that I'm always getting a consistent angle up against the table saw blade. One of the neat things about using a wedgie sled is it will take out issues with your table saw. For example, if your blade is not exactly parallel with the miter groove, or if the blade's not exactly at 90 degrees, using the wedgie sled and properly assembling the segments that you cut together will basically negate those issues with the table saw and give you a perfectly fitting ring. I started out with this homemade sled, and with the homemade sled, the things that I ran into is that it's difficult to get the angles exactly right? I can put a triangle between them and work to get them right, but then are they exactly 90 degrees with the blade? What ends up happening if it's not 190 degrees is you end up with this really cool set of swirled rings. And if that's what your goal is, this sled's great for that. This sled is also great and it will let you do anything you want to do, right? I can do any angle by simply loosening up the pieces, sliding it, tighten them down, and doing the same thing with the other side. So I can do any angle with this, 0 to, in my particular board, 90 degrees. Now, when I was at the segmented turning session in Chicago, I saw a board that was pre-manufactured by Peter Markham, and I decided to buy one of those boards. That board actually has some real advantages, at least for me, and I'll show you what that board looks like. So this is the board from Peter Markham. It has been milled with a CNC machine, and you'll notice that it has very specific angles, or not angles, but segments labeled here. And you can cut any segmented ring from 10 segments all the way up to 144 segments. The great part of these pins, so in this scenario, I have this set up to configure to cut a 12 segment ring. And what you'll see is that this pin will align with these holes, so you're guaranteed that the angles are always the same. So I really enjoy using this board. The setup time is almost 0 for this board, and I think it works out really well for me. So the next thing I have is a stop block. So this is a homemade stop block. If you look online, you can find a number of different places to show you how to build this, as well as to build a homemade wedgie sled. What this does is it goes into the miter groove. And once it's into the miter groove, you can adjust simply by loosening this up and sliding it in or out against the blade so that you're guaranteed to get the same cut every time. I use Incra setup blocks between the block edge and the table saw blade to make sure that I get the exact dimensions I want. Once that's done and set, I'll basically pull it back out of the way. And I have a homemade ramp. Again, all this is on the internet. You can find out how to make them. I've made mine with magnets in the bottom so that it will stick to the table saw. The beauty behind this is that when you cut a segment, it hits that wedge and kind of rolls off onto the table, keeping most of the segments from getting caught with the blade and thrown away off the table. Sometimes still, I will lose a segment. The back of the shop has got lots of segments back there where they've flown off the table. So this is a setup that I'm currently using for the video that I'm going to show you here in just a minute. But again, if you're interested in learning more about how I use the wedgie sled, you want to see details about that in a written form, go to bebopsturnings.com, look under tips, and you'll find articles there on on how to use the wedgie sled, and 2, on how to glue up segments. Gluing up segments the correct way is how you get those perfect rings. So it's a combination of using this board and gluing up appropriately using the lines that you get drawn on the wood. Speaking of lines, when you go to set up your wood, what you want to do is, once you've milled it down to the proper size, you want to put a line on the front and a line on the top. Now I put these on with markers so that you can see them in the video. I'd use a pencil just so that it doesn't bleed into your wood. These marks are secret to how this board actually works. I will put this down onto the sled, onto the top sled, with the line towards the front and the line on the top, and I'll take just the edge off so that I can get the angle of the first segment started. Once I take it up, I don't flip it over, I don't do anything with it, I simply pick it up and slide it straight back to the back wedge. push it up tight against the stop block, and then make another cut. But going back and forth from front to back, that ends up giving you segments with lines on the front, lines on the back, lines on the front. And so when you put those segments together, you use those lines, and that again is what takes advantage of the corrections, if you will, of the wedgie sled against your table saw. So let's take and watch me use this setup to cut a 24 segment ring out of maple. So I'm going to be using my Incra setups blocks to be able to make sure that I get the perfect size segment. I have a homemade stop block that I'm pushing up against these Incra setup blocks so that I get that distance correct. This is very repeatable if I'm using these blocks in a stop block. Once this distance is set, you slide the stop block back, and I put into place my homemade ramp. This ramp has got magnets in it to hold it down on the table, and its purpose is to let the segments slide down to the tabletop instead of flying away. Sometimes they fly away anyway. Now we're going to take our segment, and we're going to have the line pointing forward and the line on the top, and we're going to lay it down on the front rail and cut off just the edge so we get that point to the right angle. And then we're going to move it to the back rail without flipping it over, line still forward and up, push it up against the stop block and cut. There's your first segment. Move it back to the front rail. Again, don't flip it over. And you continue this process throughout. The ring that I'm making has 24 segments in it. So you continue this process until you have all the segments. I've changed the view of the camera here so that you can see better how I push the segment block up against the stop block. You want to make sure that you push it up tight against that block so that you're sure that every segment is exactly the same length. If you'd like to read about this process, you can go to my website, bebopsturnings.com, look under tips, and you'll find an article that walks through using the wedgie sled with a little bit more information than what I provided here in this video. So the process of using this wedgie sled is pretty straightforward and clear. In the end, you end up with lots of this that turns into this, that ends up turning into something like this. If you're interested in seeing how I glue up the rings so that the lines work out correctly, I have another video on that. Look at my channel. Look at gluing up segments. Hope you have a great day. If you like this video, hit the like button below. You can also see my website, bebopsturnings.com, where I have a blog site where I'm journaling my journey through turning.